Let us start our training, guys. So, agenda of this training, so high level agenda, I'm going to discuss of this overall training. So, we are going to discuss about, we will have overview and introduction to Oracle GoldenGate Microservices. So, guys, 21C is the latest version of Oracle GoldenGate. And this is the first training which is going to get conducted on GoldenGate Microservices 21. So, there has been no other training which has been conducted so far. So you are getting introduced to GoldenGate Microservices 21C for the very first time. There have been like instances where like there has been discussion about 21C features, but this is full-fledged 21C microservices training. So overview and introduction to GoldenGate Microservices. So microservices is still a newbie. Like even if you go out into the market, like you may find some GoldenGate administrators, but still GoldenGate itself is very niche technology. Still, like even though if I compare 2015 and 2021, yes, the technology has grown. The people who understand that if I compare 2015 and now, it has grown, but still it's not, still it's a niche technology, like not many people know. And the way it is being used by various organizations or various projects, still they are looking for different GoldenGate administrators, experts. So overview and introduction to GoldenGate microservices. Download and installation of GoldenGate microservices we'll be doing. Configuration of GoldenGate microservices. Setting up replication in GoldenGate microservices. So all these things will also be comparing with classic architecture as well, like how it used to work in classic. You will be able to understand that as well. Then 21C GoldenGate new features, configuration of parameter files in GoldenGate microservices architecture. So parameters and parameter files in Oracle GoldenGate are very critical. So we'll be discussing about how to configure parameter files in GoldenGate microservices, how to create credential store, performance metrics, another like monitoring the GoldenGate performance is another important aspect. So performance metrics server was introduced from GoldenGate version 12.3 and still it is considered to be newbie. So how we use it, what is performance metrics server, we'll be discussing that. Then different components of microservices architecture. So we'll be discussing about service manager, administration server, distribution server, receiver server, admin client versus GGSCI. So in GoldenGate classic architecture, if you know, there was GGSCI, right? Now the classic architecture GGSCI has been replaced with admin client in microservices. So what is admin client? How do you use it? We'll be using that, discussing about that. Classic architecture versus microservices GoldenGate. We'll be discussing that. And upgrading classic to microservices. So now the thing is, if you go out into the market, like still most of the implementations are on, you may find on classic, but Oracle is asking its customer to upgrade to microservices. So how do you upgrade? We'll be discussing that as well. Deinstallation we'll be discussing as well. Along with that, we'll be discussing few other topics as well. But this was the high level agenda which I mentioned here. So in today's session, what we are going to discuss is we are going to discuss about overview and introduction to Oracle GoldenGate Microservices architecture. Different Oracle GoldenGate architecture will be discussing. Download and installation of GoldenGate Microservices will be discussing, and then training guidelines like how do you set up. So today we'll be keeping light a bit, but we'll be discussing about Oracle GoldenGate Microservices. So before I proceed, let us discuss about Oracle database architecture. So GoldenGate is a product which works on the database. So basically it extracts the data from the database. So to, so the thing is GoldenGate works on multiple databases, heterogeneous database as well, like Oracle, MySQL, or SQL Server, DB2, times 10, Informix, various other databases on in different various platforms. So how does it, from where does it read the data from? Does it capture the data directly from tables or does it capture data from somewhere else? We'll discuss about that. So first of all, Oracle database architecture. About Oracle database architecture. So Oracle database architecture is divided into two parts. First is SGA and second is Oracle database, where the actual file resides. So SGA consists of multiple things like background processes, and memory components. So memory components include library cache, data dictionary cache, database buffer cache, Java pool, redo log buffer, and large pool, to name a few. Background processes include pmon, smon, database writer, log writer, checkpoint, and other background processes are there. Oracle database contains the actual files, like data files, which contains the actual data. Like say, for example, when you do select star from employee table, so you get that output. From where you get that output from? You get that output from the data file. So data files are the files where the actual data is stored. Then control file. So control files are the most critical files in Oracle database. So control files stores the metadata information. Control files are the most critical files of the Oracle database. If you lose your control file, if you don't have any redundancy of your control file, your database may not come up. So control files are the most critical files in Oracle database. So control file stores the metadata information, data about data. Then you have redo log files. So redo log files are the files which contains the changes being made to the database. So whatever changes include your insert, update, delete, any DDL or DML transactions, whatever happened at the database level. So DDL includes create, alter, modify, or any definition change which is being done. That is called as DDL. And DML is insert, update, delete. So the difference between DDL and DML is basically DML requires exclusive commit, but DDL doesn't require commit. So they are auto commit, DDL or auto commit. So your redo log file contains the changes being made to the database. So any change being made to the database is stored in redo log file as well. Before it gets returned to the data file, it gets stored into redo log file in case of, for the sake of recovery. Okay. So redo log files are the files which stores the changes which are stored in the database. So whatever changes being stored in the database, those changes are stored in redo log file. Then the redo log files are backed up at the OS level. So the backup of redo log files are called as archive log files. So how does the data comes into a redo log file and archive log file? So basically these are called as the transaction logs. So once the backup of redo log file is taken on disk, it is called as archive log file. It is called as archive log file. So archive log file, redo log file, or backup of redo log file, which are archive log files, contains the changes being made to the database. So whatever changes are made to the database, those changes are recorded into redo log files or the backup of redo log files, which are called as archive log files. So these are called as the transaction logs of the database. So Oracle GoldenGate retrieves the changes from the database from these transaction logs of the database. Now, when we talk about SQL Server, when we talk about DB2, when we talk about MySQL, these are called as transaction logs, where the changes being made to the database are stored. In case of Oracle, those transaction logs are called as redo logs or backup of redo logs, archive logs. So redo logs and archive logs are basically the transaction logs of the database. So whatever changes are being made to the database, those changes are stored in the transaction logs. So for GoldenGate to capture the data, those changes are captured from these transaction logs of the database. Now remember one thing I want to tell you here is, just to give you a quick overview, there is a misconception which I have seen among many DBAs, and most of the DBAs I should say. They have a conception that they have the understanding, I should not use that word, they have the understanding that redo log files contains only committed transaction. That's not true. The redo log files contains committed as well as uncommitted transactions. So do archive log files, because it's a backup of redo log file. So remember, redo log file can contain committed as well as uncommitted transactions. GoldenGate captures only committed transactions. So when we discuss about architecture of GoldenGate, you will understand what I mean. So GoldenGate only capture committed transactions. Your redo log files, which are the ultimate source of GoldenGate processes, contains committed as well as uncommitted transactions. Now the question comes, how does the data comes into these redo log files or archive log files? So you have got these memory SGA memory components. So the component which is being used here is redo log buffer, and the background process being used here is log writer. So what happens is, say for example, you did something like you opened your SQL developer or Toad, you executed the command update dept11 set location equal to Canada where department number equal to 10. So what happens in that scenario is, what happens in that scenario is whenever you make the change, a dirty buffer, the data is fetched from data file to database buffer cache. Now, when you run an update statement, the buffer becomes dirty. So, from database buffer cache, before data could be returned into data file, the update statement, the update statement gets returned from database you with the help of database writer process. The dirty buffer gets returned into redo log buffer, and from redo log buffer data gets returned into redo log file with the help of log writer process. So the dirty buffer basically means, in layman terms, if I have to make you understand, the dirty buffer means the buffer which has been updated or deleted or inserted, which means basically there has been some change. So what happens is that dirty buffer gets returned into redo log buffer, and that redo log buffer, the data from redo log buffer gets returned to redo log file with help of this log writer process. So log writer process writes the data from redo log buffer to redo log file whenever there is commit, or when redo log buffer is one third full, or when there is 1 MB of redo in this redo log buffer, before database writer process writes, or every 3 seconds. And before database writer process writes the data to data file, basically before the change which you have made to the database gets committed or gets returned to the data file, actual data files, what happens in that scenario is, prior to that, the data gets returned into redo log file. Now, what is the purpose of these read? So the primary purpose of these redo log file is to redo the transaction. Say for example, you deposited the money into the bank. You went to the bank. You currently have $1,000 into your account. You went to bank. You deposited $10,000 cash. You gave that money to the cashier. So the updated balance should be $11,000. However, at the application level, cashier did the transaction, but before it could be reflected into the account, the database got crashed. So what happens right now is, the cashier has taken your money, but when you check the balance in your account, it will still show $1,000, right? So the thing is, via the application, when the database changes were made, already if the data is present in redo, which in your case would be, what happens is when the database comes up, the recovery happens from these redo log files. The recovery happens with redo log file or archive log file if the redos has been backed up to archive. So though the changes which were not applied or which were lost due to database crash will be applied to the database, ensuring the updated balance in your account becomes $11,000. Okay, this is the primary purpose. Now, the same redo log files or archive log files are basically used for CDC purpose, change data capture purpose. So, GoldenGate, what is GoldenGate first of all? What is GoldenGate? So, GoldenGate is a CDC tool. CDC stands for change data capture. Change data capture means whatever changes are happening on source database, those changes gets captured from the source database and then they are applied on the target database. So whatever changes are being made to the database, those changes are captured and then using GoldenGate, it gets applied on the target. Now there are multiple change data capture tools available in the market. Like GoldenGate has a lot of competitors like SharePlex, Attunity, or HP has its own product. So there are multiple players available in the market, but still the market share is led by GoldenGate. And That too, almost 95 to 5% it is. So GoldenGate market share is very big. GoldenGate is a CDC tool. Basically, it captures the change data. Whatever data gets changed from source database, those changes gets captured by GoldenGate. So GoldenGate captures DDL as well as DML transaction. So DDL support primarily is available for Oracle database. For other database, DDL support is not that vast or advanced. So I would only concentrate on Oracle for DDL transaction. But DML changes, they are available for multiple databases. Okay, so the ultimate source. So I'm not going to discuss about complete Oracle database architecture because it is so big. We might need 5, 6 sessions for it. I'm only discussing the part which is needed with respect to GoldenGate from this Oracle database architecture. So GoldenGate retrieves the changes or receives the changes from the transaction logs of the database. And these transaction log, if it's Oracle, that means it retrieves the changes from redo log files or backup of redo log files, which are called as archive log files. Okay. Any question from anyone related to Oracle database architecture? So guys, if you have any question, you can type in the chat window or you can unmute yourself now when I'm asking. So if anytime while I'm speaking, if you have any question, you can type in the chat window. I'll give you chance to ask the question like now. So if you have any question now, you can ask. Okay. So let us move forward. I know this, most of the people here, we are all are Oracle database administrator, but I have to cover it to make you understand what is needed for GoldenGate or what is the ultimate source of Oracle GoldenGate. So the ultimate source is transaction logs of the database. So suppose the question comes like one of the question which was being asked from me in la previous batch was, which is very valid question. Suppose something happens at the database and it is not written into redo log files. That means it won't be captured. The answer to that question is yes. GoldenGate doesn't read the data directly from the tables. GoldenGate reads the data only from the transaction logs. So if anything or something is not written into the transaction logs, it won't be captured. I'll share one instance based on this with you, but not now. Maybe after 5 or maybe after 6 or 7 sessions when you are more comfortable with this. I'll discuss about that because I've personally noticed that I had spent for that particular issue 2, 3 months around 7 years back. But yeah, the answer to that question is yes. If redo log, if redo is not, data is not written into redo, it cannot be captured. Okay. Okay. Now let us discuss about different types of GoldenGate architecture. So there are two types of architecture. So we discussed that this training is about microservices. But what is microservices or what is other things? Classic. So there are two types of architecture available in GoldenGate. First is classic, second is microservices. So I'll give you a brief history of GoldenGate. GoldenGate was founded in 1995. It was named after famous San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, and then it is called as GoldenGate. From 1995 to 2009, it was a standalone company. In 2009, Oracle overtook it, and since then it is known as Oracle GoldenGate. Now, initially, when GoldenGate was launched or introduced until 2017, basically, and GoldenGate version 12.2, there was only one way to configure GoldenGate, and that was through command prompt, GGSCA. So, many of you or some of you have already worked on it, GGSCA. I'll show it to you. Just to make you understand what I mean. So this is the one which you might have seen. Most of you must
Hello,
have seen
Ashish.
GGSA.
Hello.
GGSCI, right? So this is called as, guys, if you have any question during the session, I would say please post in the chat window when I'm speaking. So, uh, so this is GGSCI. So this GGSCI is called as classic architecture. Until 2017, it was only microservice. It was only Golden Gate. In 2017, it was renamed as Oracle Golden Gate Classic Architecture. And in 2017, a new type of architecture was launched, which is called as microservices architecture. So classic architecture is command prompt based architecture, which is available for Oracle as well as non-Oracle database. So until Golden Gate version 12.2 onwards, there was only classic architecture. From 12.3 onwards, Golden Gate introduced microservices architecture as well. So from Golden Gate version 12.3 onwards, you have classic as well as microservices architecture. So Golden Gate microservices architecture is available from Golden Gate version 12.3 onwards. Microservices allows you to set up, manage, troubleshoot Golden Gate through GUI. So we'll be discussing about how microservices work, but one of the main feature of Golden Gate which attracts everyone is it allows GUI as well. Like you can set up, manage, troubleshoot, configure Golden Gate through GUI as well. In Classic, you can only do it through command prompt. It allows integration with cloud applications as well. Now, until Golden Gate Microservices 19C, Golden Gate Microservices was available only for Oracle database. It wasn't available for non-Oracle database. I'm talking about until 19C. From 19C, support for Golden Gate Microservices is extended for 5 databases, which includes MySQL, DB2, SQL Server, and Postgres. So now Golden Gate Microservices support all these databases. MySQL, DB2, SQL Server, and Postgres. So from Golden Gate version 12.3 to 21C, which is the latest version, both classic as well as microservices architecture, both of them coexist. Okay, the binaries are different for both, of course, but both coexist. However, post 21C, classic architecture is going to be deprecated for the database for which microservices is available. Basically, for these 5 databases, classic architecture will no longer be supported post 21C. So basically, no new version of Golden Gate Classic will come for these 5 databases. It will be microservices only for the database where microservices is available. Okay. Then there is one more product in Golden Gate family which is called as Veridata. So Veridata is another product which allows you to verify the data. So say for example on source you have 10,000 records in a table. On target you have 9,000 records. So what Veridata can do for you is it can verify the data. So as the name suggests, Veridata verifies the data for you. Okay. So it can verify the data for you. Basically it is used to do data discrepancy check. Like nowadays what happens is it is separately licensed product just to give you an overview. And also what many organizations do is they buy the Veridata license and because of these cloud migrations going on, they want to ensure that data is in sync upon migration. That's why Veridata is getting very popular nowadays. And another feature with Veridata is it can repair the discrepancies as well. So whatever discrepancies comes, those discrepancies could be repaired as well using microservices, using Veridata, sorry. Okay. Yeah, someone had a question. Okay, Manali, can you increase the size of putty session? So you have the option of increasing there is a plus sign, you can do that from your end. Mine is like I'll do that if possible. Okay, Sayyed has a question. DB version and GG version should be same. So for that, hold on to your question. When we do the download and installation, we'll be discussing about that part. So it depends on the certification matrix. So that question will be answered for you in few minutes. Now there is another question. Which background process will write dirty blocks from buffer cache to redo log? I don't think there is any background process for it. It's automatic, I believe. It's a copy which gets written. I'm not sure. My answer may be wrong in that. So the question which is being asked is like the dirty buffer gets written from database buffer cache to redo log buffer. So question being asked is there any background process which write dirty blocks from buffer cache to redo log? I don't think so, or I may not be aware of. Is anyone aware about this? Like the question is, that is good question. I never thought about it. But the question is, I told you, right? The buffer, once the buffer gets dirty, it gets written into redo log buffer. So the question is there any process, background process, which writes that from database buffer cache to redo log buffer? In my opinion, like I haven't heard or I haven't read about that. Like there is any background process which does. My answer to that question would be there is no background process associated to that.
It's log writer.
No, log writer writes from redo log buffer to redo log.
Actually, server process writes, to both buffer cache as well as, sorry, redo log buffer. Server process should write redo log buffer. You know, server process, whatever the changes are there, it write in the database buffer cache as well as redo log buffer. From there, a log writer process writes from the redo log buffer to the redo log files.
Right, right. So
Right.
there is no background process basically. The answer to that question is there is no background process associated to that. Okay. Now Syed has a question on 19C DB. Can we configure 23C? So hold on to a question. We haven't gone that far, Syed, yet. Those questions will be answered to you. You will be able to answer. So the question is being what you are asking, Syed. Those questions you will be able to answer after a couple of sessions. Does GoldenGate read from redo log? So the ultimate source of GoldenGate is redo log or backup of redo log, which is archive log. So if it is able to read from redo log, it will. Otherwise, it will read from archive log. Okay. So now there is one question which is being asked and which I have answered almost like I would be saying this thing 500 times. Now, one question which people ask me is, with introduction of this microservices, does integrated no longer exist? What do you think? With introduction of this microservices, integrated no longer exists, guys?
Yes, it should be, I guess.
Okay.
Integrated extract is different than microservices. It's a process.
And what is
So
I
Yes,
guess
yes,
the extraction
it's
yes.
is
required for
okay.
troubleshooting.
okay? I'll answer that now. Yeah, Kiran, you were correct. So where you are going is absolutely correct. So guys, we are talking here about architecture. So architecture is classic and microservices. Now integrated is type of extract. Now why that question? Why that? So understand one thing. Classic, I would say, means traditional. The initial when only one type of architecture was there, it was GoldenGate. Then they renamed because microservices came. They renamed the existing one to Classic. Same way, what happened was why this question comes is you have got two type of extracts as well. So two types of extracts in GoldenGate are classic and integrated extract. So when GoldenGate was there, like until 11.204, there was only one type of extract, and it was called as GoldenGate extract. Then they launched integrated extract from GoldenGate version 11.2.0.4, GoldenGate version onwards. At that time, they renamed the existing extract to classic. So the why this confusion come among a lot of people is because they have renamed traditional extract to classic and traditional architecture to classic. So the name, because the name is same, that's why people get confused. But remember one thing, In GoldenGate, there are two types of extract. So what is extract is extract captures the data, replicate applies the data to the target database. We'll be discussing about architecture later on. But there are two types of extracts, integrated extract and classic extract. So initially when GoldenGate was founded, there was only one type of extract. In 11.204, GoldenGate launched a new type of extract which is called as integrated extract. So integrated extract is available from GoldenGate version 11.2.0.4 and database version 11.2.0.3. So if your database, I'm talking about Oracle here. So if your database version is less than 11.2.03, then you cannot use integrated. You can only use classic extract. So classic extract means the traditional extract. Then there are
Cheat.
different types of replicates available. Now, initially when GoldenGate was there, there was only one type of replicate and it was called as replicate. Then with GoldenGate version 12.1 onwards, they launched a new type of replicate which is called as integrated replicate. And the existing replicate was renamed to classic replicate or non-integrated replicate. So after that, integrated replicate was introduced. So to use integrated replicate, your GoldenGate version has to be minimum 12.1 and database version minimum has to be 12.2. Then coordinated replicate was introduced in GoldenGate version 12.2 onwards. So basically coordinated replicate is used to make your classic replicate fast. Then with 12.3 onwards, GoldenGate introduced parallel replicate, which we'll be discussing as well. Parallel replicate is of two types. So you see above, there are two types of non-integrated and integrated replicate. Those are non-parallel. So parallel replicate means parallel, there are two types of parallel replicate, parallel non-integrated replicate and parallel integrated replicate. So the non-integrated replicate running in parallel mode is called as parallel non-integrated replicate and the integrated replicate running in parallel mode is called as parallel integrated replicate. So to use the parallel replicate, the minimum GoldenGate version needed is 12.3. If your GoldenGate version is greater than 12.3, sorry, less than 12.3, you cannot use parallel replicate. So the question comes, how do we decide which one to use? I always say use the latest supported one. So if integrated is supported, use the integrated extract. Similarly, if parallel replicate or integrated replicate is supported, go with that. Okay, now the thing is integrated extract is 5 times faster than classic extract. The performance of integrated extract is really very high. Similarly, the performance of parallel replicate is much higher than the performance of parallel integrated replicate is higher than integrated replicate. Similarly, performance of parallel non-integrated replicate is higher than non-integrated or classic replicate. Now, what is extract? If you're not aware, like don't worry, we'll be discussing in detail. But these are different types of extracts and replicates available. So under classic architecture, you have got different types of extracts and replicate available. Under microservices, you have got different types of extracts and replicate available. So under classic extract, you can either configure classic extract, and under classic architecture, you can either configure your classic extract or integrated extract. Similarly, you can configure classic replicate or integrated replicate or any other replicate. Same way under microservices architecture, you have got classic extract as well as integrated extract. Similarly, you have classic or non-integrated replicate, integrated replicate, coordinated replicate or parallel replicate. So here we are talking about overall as an architecture of GoldenGate. Okay, and then integrated is type of extract and or replicate. Okay. Any questions so far in this?
Yeah. Can you tell us the difference between integrated and classic?
We'll be discussing about that. You'll understand that as well. We'll be discussing about that. What is the difference? So far we haven't discussed about what is extract at all. So that's why I'm not covering it right now. What is the difference? But for now, just keep in mind that integrated extract is fast. The performance of integrated extract is much higher than classic. Like as per Oracle, it's 5 times faster than the classic one. What is the difference between the two? We'll be discussing. Okay.
Okay.
Any other question from anyone? Okay. So
Ashish,
yeah,
like why parallel extract is so much faster than classic?
because it uses
Something.
parallel methods. Again, this part we'll be discussing. See, we haven't so far configured or discussed about what is extract and replicate yet. The answer to your question, why parallel replicate is faster than non-parallel is because there are multiple processes internally which runs, which you can configure to. That's why it makes it fast. How you do it, we'll be discussing that when we do the configuration part. Okay? Okay. Now, just to give you a quick overview on architecture of classic, how does your classic architecture works? So the difference between architecture between classic and microservices. So in classic or in GoldenGate, you have got source database and target database. So each database has its own transaction logs from where the changes are captured. So you configure GoldenGate extract process, which is also called as capture process. So GoldenGate extract process captures the changes upon reading the source transaction logs. It captures, remember, only committed transactions. I told you earlier that your redo logs or archive logs contains committed as well as non-committed transactions. However, GoldenGate extract process or capture process. So guys, during the training, your extract and capture terms are used interchangeably. In the same way, your replicate and apply are also used interchangeably. So when I mean extract, it may mean capture. It will mean capture as well. And when I mean replicate, it will also mean apply and vice versa. Okay. Okay. Now you have a source database from where the extract process is going to retrieve the changes from. Remember, it will capture only committed transaction. It will not capture any of the uncommitted transaction. Once the transactions are captured, it writes them to the trail file on local machine, which are called as local trail file. So the extract process captures it, writes it to the trail files on local machine. These trail files are binary format files which resides on operating system. Once the data becomes available into local trail, the data pump process reads the data from local trail, sends it over TCP/IP network, and writes it to remote trail on target machine. So the trail file residing on source database or source server is called as local trail. The trail file residing on target machine is called as remote trail because it is remote to your source database. So this is called as local trail, which resides on source database. The one which resides on target database is called as remote trail. So capture process captures the data, writes to local trail. Pump process reads the data from local trail, sends it over TCP/IP network and writes it to remote trail on target database. Once the data becomes available into remote trail, the GoldenGate replicate or delivery process. Replicate process is also called as delivery process or apply. So GoldenGate replicate process reads the data from the remote trail and applies it to target database. So in GoldenGate classic architecture, you have got three processes involved: capture, pump, and delivery. Along with that, you have also got a manager process, right? So when I showed you this classic architecture, this is classic architecture. You see, there is a manager process as well over here. So along other processes we haven't configured, so you don't see those. So capture process captures the data, writes to local trail. Pump process reads the data from local trail, sends it over TCP/IP network, and writes it to remote. Once the data becomes available into remote trail, the replicate process reads the data from remote trail and apply it to target database. So three processes are involved: capture, pump, and replicate process. Along with that, there is a process manager process, which you don't see over here. Manager process, as the name suggests, it manages the components in its environment like capture, pump, replicate, or the trail files which are there in the environment. So each process in GoldenGate has a source to read from and a target to write to. So the extract process is reading the data from transaction logs of the database and writing to local trail. Pump process is reading the data from local trail and writing to remote trail. The replicate process is reading the data from remote trail and writing to target database. So each process in GoldenGate has a source to read from and a target to write to. Another important thing which I want to share with you here is the GoldenGate is a near real-time product. So what do we mean by near real-time is as soon as data becomes available into source database, it becomes available into the target data. But how come? The reason being the pump process here, remember, does not transfer the trail file over TCP/IP network. It transfers the data which is being written into local trail. That data is sent over TCP/IP network and returned to remote trail. You might be thinking that how the data security is managed. So GoldenGate also ensures data security in the environment. The data which is being sent is highly secured. You can also you can always compress or encrypt for routing the data to the target server. So pump process reads the data from local trail and writes it to remote trail. Okay. Pump process does not send the trail file over TCP/IP network. It sends the data which is being written into trail file. That data is getting written into remote trail file. GoldenGate also works in bidirectional environment. So bidirectional environment means both the sites will be live. So the application can be connected to site A or site B, and it will replicate the data to other sites. So if any transaction is coming on site A, it will be replicated to site B. Similarly, whatever transactions are written on site B, they will be replicated to site A using Oracle GoldenGate. Okay. Now, this is classic architecture, what I'm talking about. This is classic architecture. So classic architecture include your
So,
manager process, capture, pump, or replicate process, along with local trail and remote trail. Now, GoldenGate microservices architecture is introduced in GoldenGate version 12 CR3. Oracle GoldenGate Microservices architecture is a new REST API based architecture which enable us to configure, monitor and manage Oracle GoldenGate services using web-based user interface, web-based UI basically. So it's a REST API based architecture. From GoldenGate version 12.3, this microservices is introduced. So basically in August 2017, two architectures were launched. The existing architecture was renamed to classic and then microservices was introduced. Now if you have to directly, if you so say for example, if you are right now using classic and you have to upgrade to microservices, is there a direct way? No. If you want to use new microservices architecture, you will have to do a fresh install and then migrate to the architecture. Like you cannot directly migrate from classic to microservice. We'll be discussing about that. So GoldenGate microservices architecture contains service manager. So I'll be discussing in detail, but just to give you a brief overview, you don't have manager. So microservices, as the name suggests, in microservices, you have different services which run. So these services are called as administration server, distribution server, performance metric server, and receiver server. So in GoldenGate microservices architecture, you don't have the pump process. You don't have pump process. Pump process in GoldenGate microservices architecture has been replaced by distribution server. So the task which was earlier done by pump process, that task is now taken over by distribution server. So distribution server sends the data over TCP/IP network. The distribution server distribution server has replaced classic architecture data pump process in microservices architecture. So remember, in microservices architecture, data pump no longer exists. In the same way, now what happens is, you don't see over here, but when pump process sends in classic architecture, what happens is, when pump process sends the data over TCP/IP network, on target server, there is a collector process which runs. Collector process, what it does is, it collects the data which is being sent over TCP/IP network. So collector process, as the name suggests, it collects the data which is being sent over TCP/IP network by the data pump process. It's a background process. Collector process, as the name suggests, it collects the data, and it's a background process which runs on the target. Now the collector process of classic has been replaced with the receiver server in microservice. So you see here, there is service manager. Under service manager, you have got different services running: administration server, distribution server. So classic architecture data pump process has been replaced with distribution server in microservices. In the same way, classic architecture collector process has been replaced with receiver server in microservices architecture. So receiver server, as the name suggests, it receives the changes. So the distribution server, whatever data is being sent over TCP/IP network by the distribution server, the receiver server on the target machine receives those changes and writes it to remote trail file. So in microservices architecture, so as the name suggests, like you must have heard this, a lot of technologies are moving to microservices, like ServiceNow. So what happens in microservices? Microservices means things runs as a service. In classic architecture, what happens is, there are processes which are involved. There are processes which are involved in classic architecture. However, in microservices, things runs as a service. So there are multiple services which runs in microservices architecture. So these services are called as administration server, distribution server, performance metric server, and receiver server. Under administration server, you have got extract process, replicate process. You can do all the configuration over there. So the basic concept remains the same, whether you use classic or microservices, it doesn't matter. In classic architecture as well, you have got extract process which does the task for you, and replicate extract process extracts the data for you, replicate process applies the data for you. In the same way, in microservices as well, the things remain same. It's just that extract and replicate configuration is done under administration server. The distribution server replaced data pump process of classic, and receiver server has replaced collector process of classic architecture. So things runs as a service in microservices architecture. That's the basic difference between classic and microservices. So in classic architecture, there are multiple processes. So it's a process-based architecture. However, microservices is service-based architecture. It's a REST API-based architecture. Along with that, you have got GUI as well, from where you can configure, monitor, and manage Oracle GoldenGate environment. Okay. So there is a question. The log buffer initialization parameter determines the amount of memory that is used. Should waiting be a problem? Is it a server or services? So basically, these are called as server, administration server, but these are basically services. Though these are called as server, but these are services which are running. Okay. Any question from anyone? So guys, don't worry. We have just discussed or touch base upon what is microservices right now. We haven't done anything related to microservices. So what is what we are talking about, like administration server or what is distribution server or what is service manager, everything will be more clearer to you when we do the practical. So in the next session, what we'll do, so day 2 session we'll be doing tomorrow. So the day 2 session of Oracle GoldenGate microservices architecture is upcoming tomorrow. So it's a day 2 session. Okay, same timing it will be. Now the link to join will be new link. I'll be sharing it with you 12 hours before. So in the next session, we'll be discussing about download of GoldenGate microservices, installation of GoldenGate microservices. Then we'll be discussing about creating the service manager, basically deployment we'll be creating. Then how to log into service manager, and you will see different services over there, what we are mentioning right now. And then if time permits, we'll discuss about how to create credential store, different directory structures, like directory structure difference between classic and microservices. So what you have to do prior to the session is you have to set up the lab. I'll be discussing about training guidelines on completion of this. And then you just have to set up the lab in as part of today's session. So if I have to quickly recap about today's session, what we discussed is we discussed about different types of architecture in GoldenGate, like GoldenGate classic architecture and microservices architecture, and what is the difference. Then we discussed about GoldenGate classic architecture. We also discussed about different types of extracts and replicate. We discussed about classic architecture. Then we got introduced to Oracle GoldenGate Microservices architecture. So microservices architecture is available from 2017 and is a REST API based architecture of GoldenGate. Different components include service manager, administration server, distribution server, receiver server, performance metric server. So data pump process of classic architecture has been replaced with distribution server in microservices architecture. In the same way, the collector process of classic architecture has been replaced with receiver server in microservices architecture. So collector process in classic architecture is a background process. Receiver server in microservices has replaced that collector process in microservices architecture. Okay. Any question from anyone? Okay, I see there is a question. So we cannot upgrade classic architecture microservices if we have to install microservices from fresh. So you can upgrade your classic to microservices, but there is no direct way to upgrade. How do we upgrade? We'll be discussing, but like say for example, you have to upgrade from one version to another version. You don't have to do separate installation, right? You can do it's a called as direct installation. So upgrading from classic to microservices, there is no direct installation upgrade present. You have to do fresh install and then migrate the process. Correct. Installation of GoldenGate microservices is on standalone database or it will be on RAC database. It supports RAC as well as non-RAC standalone as well. The major advantage with GoldenGate is it works in the way it works in RAC databases in the same way it works in non-RAC. 95% of configuration also always remains same. The way GoldenGate works with Oracle database in the same way it works for non-Oracle database like MySQL. So always the concept remains same. There is extract process which captures the data, replicate process which applies the data. If you're using classic architecture, pump process will send the data over TCP IP network. If you're using microservices, then it will be distribution server which will be sending the data to the microservices. Will it
Ashish,
capture
this is
committed? Will it capture committed data from archive logs? So it will capture only committed transaction. It will not capture any uncommitted transaction.
Ashish. This is
Yeah, Vinu.
Venu. Just a question. To set up the lab, same directions we follow as for the download the VM and do
I'll
it,
be
or there.
discussing about training guidelines now. I'll be discussing about that. So
Okay.
if anyone has any question, MSI has only one extract process, or you can pick between classic and integrated. You can pick. These questions will be answered for you when we do the practical. Hold on to your question for one or two sessions.
Hey Ashish, what would be the role of performance matrix server?
So it is used to, as the name suggests, it provides you the performance matrix of Oracle GoldenGate environment. So once we install, we'll see. So you can install GoldenGate on Hub as well. GoldenGate is, we'll be discussing about what is GoldenGate Hub as well when we do the installation. We'll be discuss about that as well. Okay. So guys, if you want to drop off anyone, you can drop off. I'll be discussing about training guideline. You can be part of it because a time like the time has complete. So it will take around 5-10 minutes. So guys, you must have received few of the emails from me. So one of the email would be your training enrollment confirmation email. So it tells you just for your information, like which courses you are currently enrolled to. Based on that, you can check. So if you see any discrepancy, like it's system generated, right? So there may be some discrepancy. But if you see any discrepancy, you can reply to the email and then I can see, and if needed, it could be corrected as well. Now, for those who have, it takes 24 to 48 hours to receive. So who have enrolled in last 24 to 48 hours might not have received it. So that's okay. You will be receiving it soon. So this is first email which you must have received. The second email is related to your lab setup kit. So lab setup kit means setting up the virtual boxes. Okay. Again, same email you will be receiving once your enrollment is confirmed. So if you have enrolled in last 24 to 48 hours, wait for some time. So it contains two machines, two virtual boxes, GGate 1 and GGate 2, which we are going to use for this training. So these are pre-cooked virtual boxes which have database software. GoldenGate software is present. It is not installed. We'll be performing all the installation and everything. I'll show you and then you will be doing the same. So you can open your GGate 1 and GGate 2. Once you open your GGate 1 link, then right click and download your GGate 1. Same way you can right click and download your GGate 2 as well. Once you have right clicked and downloaded, okay, then you will need this virtual box as well. So you can download this or you can search for latest from virtualbox.org. Once you get that, what you need to do is then you need to open your virtual box, Oracle virtual box, Oracle VM virtual box. Click on file, click on import appliance. So there is a document as well, step-by-step pictorial guide. I would highly recommend follow it step by step. It will take 5 minutes just to follow and you will be good. So click on file, go to the location where your GGate 1 is present. Okay, open this GGate 1, click on next. So the location where you have downloaded it. Now suppose if you have any network connections, I have mentioned in that email what you can do if you have like network issues, like just in case while downloading it gets interrupted in between. So click on next. Okay. After that, it is really very important, this MAC address policy. So the RAM I have assigned is around 4 GB. Remember, each virtual box will consume more memory. So it is recommended that you should have 12 to 16 GB of RAM and around 200 to 250 GB of hard disk for both GGate 1 and GGate 2. So here you need to select the MAC address policy as include all network adapter MAC addresses. You have to choose that. Once you do that, click on finish. Okay. Once you click on finish, it will be imported.
Ashish, this
Okay. In the same way, you can, once GGate 1 is imported, then again click on import appliance and then go to downloads, means where you have downloaded, and import your GGate 2. But you have to ensure you choose the option include all MAC address part. That is really very important. Once importing is done, you can right click and click on start. Like mine is already started. That's why you see like pause and different options, but it will give you the option of starting the VM. So click on start, then it will start. Now the password of Oracle user is Oracle and the password of root user is root on this VM. I again repeat, I'm talking about OS user. So during the login, if it asks for the password, it's mentioned in the document as well, but the password is Oracle for Oracle, root for root. Okay. Now, while your machine becomes idle, it will show the clock, right? So to come out of this clock, click anywhere on this screen and then press enter. So then it will prompt you for the password. So the password of Oracle user is Oracle. Okay. Now here, what you need to do is once you log into this, right click, click on open terminal. Okay. Here what you need to do, you need to do lsnrctl. All the instructions are present in your email, so don't worry. But I'm just letting you know. Do lsnrctl, click on start. Your listener will be started. Mine is already started. Similarly, exit, then do SQL plus /sysdba. Then you just need to start up the database. And if you want to start your pluggable database, you can start your pluggable database. So all the instructions, if you see, they are mentioned over here. Like lsnrctl, start on gget1, start your pdb1 database. Similarly on gget2, start your pdb2. Okay. Any question from anyone?
So this virtual box is only for Windows, or there is a version for Mac too?
You can use this on Mac. This should work on Mac as well.
This conference will now be recorded.
Any question? If no question is there, we can wrap up the session for today, and guys, we'll continue tomorrow, same timing. Okay. So guys, I hope you were able to follow the session. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, Ashish.
Okay. So as part of today's session, set up the lab and we'll continue tomorrow. Okay. GoldenGate is very easy. You will be able to learn pretty easily. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.